When times get tough and money ran thin, our grandparents didn't scroll through food delivery apps or grab frozen dinners from the store. They rolled up their sleeves, fired up their cast iron skillets, and created hearty meals from whatever they had on hand. And ground beef was their secret weapon. These aren't your fancy restaurant dishes or Instagram-worthy creations. These are the real-deal survival recipes that fed families through hard times, economic struggles, and long winters when every penny counted. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. This dish saved more families during the Great Depression than any government program ever could. When paychecks were small and bellies were empty, mothers across America knew they could stretch a single pound of ground beef to feed 6 hungry mouths. The magic happened in a heavy skillet where beef was browned until every bit of fat rendered out. Then flour was stirred in to create a roux that would make French chefs jealous. The secret wasn't in expensive ingredients, it was in patience. Grandma would slowly add milk, stirring constantly to prevent lumps, creating a rich gravy that could coat every spoon. Salt, pepper, and maybe a dash of Worcestershire if the family was feeling fancy. Served over mountains of mashed potatoes made from 5-pound bags, bought in bulk, this meal could fill stomachs and warm hearts. Even when the future looked uncertain, children would clean their plates and ask for seconds, never knowing they were eating poor food. To them, it was just delicious. Old-school goulash, American chopped suey. Every neighborhood had that one family who made goulash differently. And every family swore their version was the only real way to make it. This wasn't the Hungarian paprika-heavy version that purists might recognize. This was American survival cooking at its finest. Ground beef, elbow macaroni, and whatever vegetables were about to go bad in the icebox. The beauty of goulash was its flexibility. Got some bell peppers that are getting soft? Throw them in. Onions that are sprouting? Perfect. A can of tomatoes that's been sitting in the pantry. Essential, the ground beef has browned first, then everything else joined the party in one big pot. No fancy techniques required, just patience and the wisdom to let everything cook together until the flavors married into something greater than the sum of its parts. Kids loved it because it was basically hamburger and pasta in one bowl. Parents loved it because it used up leftovers and stretched ingredients further than they had any right to go. A pot of goulash could feed the family for 2 days, taste better as leftovers, and cost less than a single restaurant meal today. Sloppy Joe pie, when regular sloppy joes weren't fancy enough for Sunday dinner. But the budget couldn't handle a real roast. Creative cooks invented the sloppy Joe pie. This clever dish took the familiar flavors of the sandwich filling and dressed them up with a cornbread topping that made everything feel more special. The base started like any good sloppy Joe. Ground beef browned with onions, then seasoned with ketchup, Worcester sauce, and a touch of brown sugar for that sweet, tangy flavor kids couldn't resist. But instead of piling it on hamburger buns, the mixture went into a casserole dish and got topped with cornbread. Batter made from a simple box mix or scratch ingredients. As it baked, something magical happened. The cornbread rose and turned golden while absorbing just enough of the beef juices to stay moist and flavorful. The result looked like a proper dinner that could grace any table, even when unexpected company showed up. Served with a simple salad or canned green beans, this dish could make any family feel like they were dining in style, regardless of what was actually in the bank account. Beef and cabbage skillet. During the lean months of winter, when fresh vegetables were expensive luxuries, cabbage became the hero of many dinner tables. Cheap, hearty, and able to stretch a small amount of meat into a filling meal. Cabbage paired with ground beef created a dish that was both nutritious and satisfying. The process was simple but required timing. Ground beef is browned first, then pushed to one side of a large skillet, while onions are cooked in the rendered fat. Cabbage was added in stages, the thick ribs first, then the tender leaves, allowing each piece to wilt and caramelize slightly. Salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of vinegar or a sprinkle of caraway seeds added flavor without adding cost. What made this dish special was how it transformed humble ingredients into something that felt substantial and complete. The cabbage absorbed the beef flavors, while contributing its own sweet, slightly tangy taste. Served with boiled potatoes or thick slices of bread, this meal could fill hungry stomachs and provide the energy needed for hard physical work. Many families are variations of this dish several times a week, never getting tired of it because it tasted like comfort and security. Shipwreck casserole. The name tells you everything you need to know about this recipe. It was born from desperation and whatever happened to be in the pantry. When grocery money ran out before payday, mothers would survey their kitchens and create miracles from seemingly nothing. Shipwreck casserole became legendary because it combined the irresistible crunch of potato chips with hearty ground beef in a way that made everyone forget they were eating leftovers. Ground beef was stretched with whatever vegetables were available, often canned corn, green beans, or diced tomatoes. The mixture was seasoned with onion soup mix, pantry staple that added flavor without fresh ingredients, and maybe a can of cream soup to bind everything together. The magic happened on top, where crushed potato chips created a golden, crunchy layer that children would fight over. This dish proved that sometimes the best recipes come from having no choice but to be creative. Families would request it even during better times because it tasted like childhood, like making do, like the satisfaction of turning nothing into something delicious. The name stuck because everyone knew what it meant. Good food made from whatever didn't get wrecked in your kitchen. Beef and biscuit ring. Sunday dinners called for something that looked special even when the budget was tight. The beef and biscuit ring solved this problem by taking ordinary ground beef and presenting it in a way that looked like holiday fare. This dish became a favorite because it impressed guests while using ingredients that cost almost nothing. The beef mixture was straightforward. Ground beef browned with onions and seasoned with whatever was available. Sometimes cream of mushroom soup was added for richness, or a packet of onion soup mix for extra flavor. The magic was in the presentation. Refrigerated biscuit dough was arranged in a ring around the outside of a round baking dish. Then the beef mixture was spooned into the center. As it baked, the biscuits rose and turned golden brown, creating an impressive crown around the savory filling. When brought to the table, it looked like something from a fancy cookbook. But everyone knew it was just good old-fashioned comfort food dressed up for company. Children loved pulling apart the individual biscuits and dipping them in the beef mixture, making dinner interactive and fun, even during the hardest times. Beef jambalaya baked rice was cheap, filling, and could absorb flavors like nobody's business. When Southern families needed to stretch their ground beef further, they turned to dishes like this beef jambalaya bake that transformed a small amount of meat into a feast. This wasn't authentic Louisiana jambalaya. It was survival cooking that borrowed flavors from wherever they worked. The dish started with browning ground beef and onions, then adding rice, canned tomatoes, and whatever seasonings were available. Paprika gave it color and a hint of smokiness, while garlic powder and cayenne pepper added depth without requiring fresh ingredients. Chicken broth, when available, made the rice extra flavorful, but water worked just fine when money was tight. Everything went into a casserole dish and baked until the rice was tender and had absorbed all the liquid. The result was a complete meal in one dish. Protein, starch, and vegetables, all combined into something that tasted exotic and special. Families could eat this for days, and it actually improved with time as the flavors melted together. It was proof that good food didn't require expensive ingredients, just creativity and patience. Mock prime rib patties. The name was pure marketing genius. Calling anything prime rib made it sound expensive and special, even when it was made from the cheapest cut of meat available. These patties were designed to fool both the eye and the palate, creating the illusion of luxury when there was none to be had. The secret was in the seasoning and presentation. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, and a careful blend of spices that included garlic powder, onion powder, and sometimes a touch of soy sauce for that umami richness. The patties were shaped thicker than regular hamburgers and seared in a hot skillet to create a good crust, then finished in the oven to ensure they cooked evenly throughout. What really sold the illusion was the gravy, a rich brown sauce made from the pan drippings that tasted like it came from an expensive roast. Served with mashed potatoes and whatever vegetables were affordable, these patties made families feel like they were dining on the finest cuts of beef. Children grew up thinking their mothers were miracle workers, never knowing that love and creativity were the only expensive ingredients in the recipe. Hamburger spoonbread casserole. Spoonbread was a Southern tradition that turned cornmeal into something creamy and comforting, almost like a cross between cornbread and pudding. When combined with ground beef, it became a complete meal that could stretch ingredients and fill bellies without breaking the bank. The beef mixture was kept simple. Ground beef browned with onions and seasoned with salt, pepper, and maybe a dash of hot sauce for those who liked a little heat. This was layered in a casserole dish and topped with spoonbread batter made from cornmeal, eggs, milk, and a touch of sugar. The beauty was in how the two layers cooked together with the spoonbread, absorbing just enough of the beef juices to stay moist while developing a golden crust on top. The result was comfort food at its finest. Creamy, satisfying, and substantial enough to serve as the centerpiece of any meal. Families would gather around the table and scoop portions directly from the casserole dish. The spoonbread holds together just enough to make each bite perfect. It was the kind of dish that made everyone feel taken care of, regardless of what was happening in the world outside. Salisbury steak. Before frozen TV dinners made this dish a pale imitation of itself, Salisbury steak was a masterpiece of stretching meat into something special. Named after Dr. James Salisbury, who believed in the power of beef for good health. This recipe became a staple because it made 1 pound of ground beef look and taste like expensive steaks. The trick was in the binding. Breadcrumbs, egg, and a splash of milk transformed ordinary ground beef into individual portions that looked substantial on the plate. Shaped by hand into oval patties, these were pan-fried until golden brown, then set aside while onions cooked down into sweet, caramelized perfection. The gravy was built right in the same pan, using the beef drippings and flour to create a rich brown sauce that made everything taste like Sunday dinner. Smart housewives would make extra patties and freeze them for quick meals later in the week. The children thought they were getting steak for dinner. And in a way, they were, just not the kind that came from the butcher's expensive cuts. This was working-class steak, made with love and necessity in equal measure. Beef macaroni loaf. Meatloaf was a staple, but when ground beef was especially scarce, creative cooks found ways to stretch it even further. The beef macaroni loaf was one such innovation, combining ground beef with cooked macaroni to create a dish that looked substantial and impressive, while using less meat than a traditional meatloaf. The trick was in the binding. Eggs, breadcrumbs, and milk held everything together, while the macaroni added bulk and a different texture that made each slice interesting. Onions were diced fine and mixed throughout. And sometimes, a can of tomato sauce was incorporated for extra moisture and flavor. The mixture was shaped into a loaf and baked until firm, then sliced and served with whatever vegetables were available. What made this dish special was how it transformed leftovers into something that felt new and exciting. Leftover macaroni from earlier in the week got a second life, and children who might have complained about eating the same thing twice were fooled into thinking they were getting something completely different. It was economical cooking at its smartest, proving that waste was never acceptable when every ingredient mattered. Chia hot dish. The Midwest had its own language when it came to comfort food, and hot dish was a term for what other regions might call casseroles. Chia hot dish was one of those recipes that every church cookbook included, and every family made slightly differently depending on what was in their pantry. Ground beef formed the protein base, browned with onions and seasoned simply with salt and pepper. Canned vegetables, corn, green beans, or whatever was on sale, joined the mixture along with cream of mushroom soup that acted as both sauce and binding agent. The whole thing was topped with frozen tater tots or mashed potatoes, depending on what was available and what the family preferred. The name chia had nothing to do with the superfood seeds. That would become popular decades later. It was just a regional term that stuck. What mattered was how this dish brought families together around the dinner table. How it filled hungry stomachs after long days of hard work. And how it used simple ingredients to create something that felt like a warm hug on a plate. It was unpretentious food that never pretended to be anything other than what it was. Good, honest cooking for good, honest people. Corn chip beef bake. Sometimes the best recipes came from happy accidents. And the corn chip beef bake was likely born when someone decided to use up a bag of stale corn chips instead of throwing them away. What started as desperate measure became a family favorite that combined the familiar flavors of tacos with the comfort of a hot casserole. Ground beef has been browned and seasoned with whatever Mexican-inspired spices were available. Chili powder, cumin, or sometimes just a packet of taco seasoning if the budget allowed. Canned beans, corn, and diced tomatoes stretched the meat and added nutrition. The mixture went into a casserole dish and was topped with crushed corn chips and whatever cheese could be spared. As it baked, the corn chips created a crunchy topping that contrasted beautifully with the tender beef mixture underneath. The cheese melted and bubbled, creating an irresistible golden layer that made everyone forget this dish was born from using up pantry scraps. Served with simple lettuce and tomato salad, it felt like a fiesta even when there was little to celebrate. It proved that sometimes the best innovations come from making do with what you have. Mock Swiss steak. Swiss steak was a restaurant dish that most families couldn't afford. But creative home cooks found ways to recreate those complex flavors using ground beef and a lot of ingenuity. The mock version delivered on the promise of tender meat and rich tomato. Gravy without requiring expensive cuts or hours of braising. Ground beef was formed into thick patties and dredged in seasoned flour, before being browned in a heavy skillet. This created the foundation for the dish. The flour helped thicken the eventual gravy, while the browning added depth of flavor. Onions were cooked until soft and sweet. Then canned tomatoes, beef broth, and seasonings were added to create a rich sauce. The patties were returned to the skillet and simmered gently until the flavors melted together. The result was remarkably similar to the original dish. Tender meat in a rich tomato gravy that begged to be served over mashed potatoes or egg noodles. Families could enjoy the satisfaction of fancy food without the fancy price tag. And children grew up thinking their mothers were culinary magicians who could recreate restaurant dishes in their own kitchens. Ketchup glazed meat patties. Ketchup was more than just a condiment. It was a cooking ingredient that could transform simple ground beef patties into something that tastes like they'd been slow-cooked for hours. The secret was in creating a glaze that caramelized during cooking, adding both flavor and visual appeal to an otherwise plain dish. The patties themselves were kept simple. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, and basic seasonings, then formed into individual portions. But the magic happened with the glaze made from ketchup, brown sugar, vinegar, and sometimes a dash of Worcestershire sauce. This mixture was brushed over the patties before cooking and again during the cooking process, building up layers of sweet, tangy flavor. As the patties cooked, the glaze caramelized and created a beautiful mahogany coating that made them look expensive and sophisticated. The flavor was complex, sweet, tangy, and savory all at once, despite being made from ingredients that cost almost nothing, served with mashed potatoes and green beans. These patties could anchor a meal that felt special enough for Sunday dinner while staying within even the tightest budget. Pineapple beef bake. Sweet and savory combinations weren't as common in everyday cooking back then. But when families received canned pineapple as gifts or found it on sale, creative cooks found ways to incorporate it into hearty meals that stretched the family budget. The pineapple beef bake became a favorite because it tasted exotic and special while using familiar ingredients. Ground beef has been browned and mixed with rice, creating a foundation that could absorb flavors and provide substance. Canned pineapple chunks were drained and added along with the juice, which provided natural sweetness and helped cook the rice. Soy sauce, when available, added depth and a slightly Asian flavor that made the dish taste sophisticated and worldly. The mixture was baked in a casserole dish until the rice was tender and had absorbed all the liquid. The result was a complete meal that tasted like it came from somewhere far away and exotic, even though it was made in a regular kitchen with ingredients from the local grocery store. Children loved the sweet pineapple mixed with savory beef, and parents appreciated how the dish made. A small amount of meat feed the whole family. It was proof that a little creativity could transport a family's dinner table to places they'd never been. Rag mop casserole. The name came from the appearance of the noodles mixed throughout the casserole, which resembled the strands of an old-fashioned rag mop. This dish became popular because it used broken or leftover pasta, turning what might have been waste into the foundation for a hearty family meal. Often broken spaghetti, elbow macaroni, or egg noodles that were past their prime. Canned tomatoes and tomato sauce created the base, while cream of mushroom soup added richness and helped bind everything together. The mixture was seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and whatever herbs were growing in the kitchen garden. Baked until bubbly and topped with cheese if the budget allowed. The casserole was filling, flavorful, and satisfying in a way that made everyone forget it was made from leftovers and scraps. The pasta absorbed the beef and tomato flavors while contributing its own hearty texture. Families could eat this for several meals, and it actually improved with time as the flavors melted together. Beef stuffed zucchini boats. Similar to the Garden Patch version, but designed for families who bought their zucchini rather than growing it. This recipe focused on making the most of store-bought ingredients while creating something that looked and tasted special. The key was in selecting zucchini that were large enough to stuff, but still tender enough to cook properly. The zucchini shells were pre-baked briefly to ensure they would be tender, then stuffed with the beef mixture and returned to the oven. The beauty of this dish was in its presentation. Each stuffed zucchini looked like an individual entree that might be served in a restaurant, while actually being made from ingredients that were economical and readily available. Families could feel like they were dining elegantly, while actually eating a practical meal that used affordable ingredients efficiently. It was proof that good presentation could elevate any dish, regardless of its humble origins. Midwest meat pie. Meat pies were traditional comfort food that could stretch a small amount of meat into a meal that felt substantial and satisfying. The Midwest version was particularly practical because it used ingredients that were readily available in farming communities and could be prepared ahead of time for busy families. Ground beef is browned with onions and mixed with diced potatoes, carrots, and whatever other vegetables are available. The mixture was seasoned simply and placed in a pie crust, often homemade from flour, shortening, and water. A top crust sealed in all the flavors and created an attractive presentation that made the meal feel special and complete. The finished pie could be cut into wedges that provided individual portions, making it easy to serve and portion control natural. The crust absorbed some of the meat juices while cooking, creating a flavorful bottom layer that added to the overall satisfaction of the meal. Families could prepare these pies ahead of time and bake them when needed, making dinner preparation more efficient during busy periods. It was practical cooking that delivered both nutrition and comfort in every slice. Dutch oven meatloaf with crackers. Don't confuse regular old boring meatloaf with this special Dutch oven meatloaf with crackers. No, don't get your wires crossed. It's definitely different. Back in the day, Grandma really knew how to jazz things up and make this classic into something unexpected just by adding some crackers. When crackers are added to the mix, they become like little sponges full of flavor, absorbing juices and adding to the texture of the dish. But this still doesn't really make it that different from the regular meatloaf. So, where does the difference lie? Well, it lies in the Dutch oven. Baking this in an oven or pot, as some might say, locks in flavor and moisture like nothing you've ever seen before. The result is a tender, savory meatloaf with a perfectly crisp outer layer. Grandma knew how to serve it right with a thick layer of ketchup glaze on top, because sometimes more is more. Plus, when you add a side of mashed potatoes, it'll be like you're biting into nostalgia. Back in the Great Depression, meatloaf was a go-to because it stretched a small amount of beef into a meal for the whole family. And crackers were cheaper than breadcrumbs. And we all know Grandma knows how to save some bucks. Beef and potato casserole. Ah, the classic beef and potato casserole reminds me of a time when 40-step recipes from Instagram didn't exist. And it was all about simplicity and comfort. The layers of brown ground beef, golden potatoes, and a creamy sauce could warm even the coldest hearts, topped with a generous amount of cheese. Of course, because when you're at Grandma's, more cheese equals more love. Why was this dish suddenly forgotten? Maybe it's because all of the new recipes call for superfoods and gluten-free alternatives, which this casserole is definitely not. It's a classic, old-school ground beef dish. The magic of beef and potato casserole lies in its simplicity. It's basically just a few staple ingredients thrown together and baked until bubbly. No fuss. It's hearty and delicious. Plus, who doesn't love a meal where everything is combined into one pan? Less cleanup means more time in front of the TV watching your favorite 80s sitcom. Seconds are almost always guaranteed. So you could also say that this dish is perfect for meal stretches and is budget-friendly. Cowboy casserole. Cowboy casserole is a ground beef dish that holds its roots in hearty, down-to-earth cooking. Think of it as a Tex-Mex twist on shepherd's pie, and you're pretty close. This one's a favorite for folks who love a blend of flavors and textures. It has ground beef, corn, beans, and a creamy sauce layered underneath a topping of crispy golden tater tots. When Grandma made this, it was an instant family favorite. This recipe shows her knack for turning a pound of ground beef into a big filling meal. Cowboy casserole is kind of like the ultimate comfort food. Perfect for chilly days when you want something warm and satisfying. And let's be honest, the tater topping is the best part. This is another meal that brings everything together in one baking dish, which is always a plus for busy families. Back then, the ingredients were simple and affordable, making it a go-to for families trying to keep costs down. While it may not be the healthiest dish, Cowboy casserole hits all the right notes for nostalgia and comfort. Sloppy Joes. Nothing says classic comfort like a big, messy Sloppy Joe. This dish may not be fancy, but it's fun, easy to make, and loaded with flavor. Grandma probably had her own secret ingredient for these, whether it was a dash of Worcestershire sauce, a hint of mustard, or an extra spoonful of brown sugar for sweetness. Sloppy Joe's takes the humble ground beef and turns it into something entirely different with a rich, tangy tomato-based sauce. The soft buns soak up the sauce, and every bite is a messy delight. Sloppy Joes became popular in the 1950s, but their origins date back to the early 20th century. They were a staple for families because they're cheap, easy to make, and everyone loves them. This is a meal that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's just pure, messy fun that's as satisfying today as it was back then. Beef tamale pie. The tamale is a traditional Mexican dish that dates back to the days of the Aztecs. It is a dough made of masa that is usually stuffed with sweet or savory fillings, and then steamed or boiled in a corn husk. Imagine seasoned ground beef, corn, and cheese, all baked under a blanket of cornbread or masa. The early tamale pie was a simple dish made with beef and a chili sauce that was sandwiched between two layers of cornmeal mush. However, as this dish entered the mid-century with its more is better mentality, other meats could be used as well as other ingredients added such as corn, olives, green peppers, or cheese. We don't know for sure who was the creative mind that brought us this amazing dish, but we can probably assume that it was somebody possibly from Texas, Mexico, or even California. Taco pie or Frito pie. Taco pie or Frito pie is a popular dish in the Midwestern, Southeastern, and Southwestern United States. Ground beef seasoned with taco spices, a crispy tortilla or crescent roll crust, melty cheese, and layers of refried beans or salsa. It's like all of the best parts of a taco turned into a pie. The oldest known recipe using Fritos brand. Corn chips with chili was published in Texas in 1949. The recipe may have been invented by Daisy Dolan, the mother of Frito Company founder Charles Elmer Dolan, and the first person to use Fritos as an ingredient in cooking. And here's a little fun fact for you. Charles Dolan and his Frito Company were early investors in Disneyland, which opened Casadritos Restaurant in Disneyland in 1955. Frito chili pie appears on the 1950s menu. Another story claims that true Frito pie originated only in the 1960s with Teresa Hernandez, who worked at the Woolworth's lunch counter in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Her Frito pie used homemade red chili con carne with cheddar cheese and onions and was served in a bag. Talk about being laid back. Beef enchilada casserole. While on the topic of casserole, we can't forget the beef enchilada casserole. Enchilada casserole is layer upon layer of beef, salsa, cheese, beans, and tortilla. Layers of ground beef, tortoise, enchilada sauce, and cheese were baked until everything melted together into one spicy, cheesy masterpiece. Enchiladas date back to the Mayans. Corn was a staple crop at the time, and corn tortillas were common. These were originally called TXI. The Spanish conquistadors changed the name from TXI to tortilla. Upon their arrival in the Western Hemisphere, the conquistadors documented a feast in which participants served a type of enchilada. Later, the first Mexican cookbook, El Ro Mexico, recorded accounts of this dish. Originally, the dish was an empty corn tortilla dipped in chili sauce. Hamburger soup. I can imagine you staring at the screen in confusion like, what even is that? Well, it's ground beef, veggies, and a rich broth all simmered together to create the ultimate cold weather comfort food. It was like having a burger and fries, except in liquid form, and you didn't have to fire up the grill. The secret to making it taste amazing was letting the ground beef soak up all those savory flavors from the broth. Carrots, onions, and celery. And if you toss in a handful of barley or pasta, you can bulk it up. Add a splash of tomato sauce or diced tomatoes adds the perfect tangy kick. And let's be real, the leftovers tasted even better the next day. Hamburger soup was a thrifty way to stretch a pound of beef into multiple servings, perfect for feeding a crowd on a budget. Plus, it's infinitely customizable. Cabbage rolls. Cabbage rolls may have had roots in old world recipes, but in the 1970s, they were a hit in many American kitchens. Large cabbage leaves were carefully steamed until tender, then filled with a savory blend of ground beef and rice. Seasoned with onions, garlic, and a touch of tomato paste. Rolled up into little parcels, they were neatly arranged in a casserole dish, then smothered in a tangy tomato sauce that balanced the richness of the filling. The dish was baked until the rolls were tender, with flavors melding together as they simmered in the sauce. Once ready, the cabbage rolls were served hot with each bite, offering a satisfying combination of savory meat and tangy sauce wrapped in the mild earthiness of the cabbage. This was one dish that took a bit of time to prepare, but the results were worth it. A cozy, filling meal that made for hearty dinners on a budget. Porcupine meatballs. Porcupine meatballs put a creative twist on traditional meatballs, with rice added to the mix to create a unique texture and flavor. The ground beef was mixed with uncooked rice, which would cook in the meatball as it simmered, giving it the look of little porcupine spines. These meatballs were seasoned with onions, garlic, and a dash of Worcestershire sauce, then shaped into rounds and simmered in a tangy tomato sauce that thickened as it cooked. As the rice expanded, it softened and absorbed the flavors of the sauce, creating a meatball that was tender, flavorful, and just a bit quirky in appearance. These porcupine meatballs were a fun dish that kids loved, not only for their playful name, but for their juicy, saucy taste. Served over a bed of fluffy mashed potatoes or simple white rice, they were a wholesome, delicious meal that families enjoyed together, bite after bite. Beef chili, a good hearty bowl of beef chili, is a classic for a reason. Grandma's recipe might have been simple with just ground beef, beans, tomatoes, and chili powder, but it was always full of flavor. Chili is a dish that can feed a crowd on a budget. And it's perfect for cold days when you want something to warm you up from the inside out. This dish has its roots in Texas, where it was originally made without beans. However, the version most people know today includes beans, which help stretch the meal and add texture. Every family has their own take on chili, and Grandma probably had hers down to an art. It's one of those dishes that is even better the next day, once all the flavors have had a chance to meld. Chili was, and still is, a go-to for parties, family gatherings, and everyday dinners. Beef empanadas. The ground beef filling was flavored with spices like cumin, paprika, and garlic, all tucked inside a flaky golden crust. They are the ultimate and customizable comfort food. You can add olives, hard-boiled eggs, or even a spicy kick if that's your thing. The filling would be scooped into circles of dough, crimped shut, and baked or fried until crispy and warm. Empanadas are first cited to be from Portugal and Galicia, Spain. Empanada comes from empanar, which means to wrap or coat in bread in Spanish. The earliest mention of empanadas by name is in a 1520s cookbook. In Catalan, the original empanadas resembled pies that were sliced into single pieces, but the basic concept has been the same ever since. Beef paprikash. No, some of you aren't fond of soupy dishes, but please hear me out. Beef paprikash. It sounds complicated to make, but I know your grandma, just like mine, made it without batting an eye. Imagine tender beef seared in a rich paprika-infused sauce, bursting with smoky and spicy flavors. This dish is like goulash's cousin, wouldn't you say? Beef paprikash is a traditional Hungarian dish that originated in kitchens where spices were basically like family heirlooms. But contrary to popular belief here in the United States, paprikos is traditionally made without beef or macaroni noodles. Shocking, right? Its origins date back to the 9th century, starting with Magyar shepherds as a simple meat and onion stew prepared in heavy iron kettles known as bograks. In the 15th century, invading Ottoman Turks introduced a new spice to Hungary, paprika, while the rest of Europe remained lukewarm towards this red chili pepper from the New World. Hungary embraced it, and paprika has since become a defining element of Hungarian cuisine. Paprika is kind of in between a soup and a stew. Unlike some stews, paprikash is not overly packed full of beef and vegetables. It is a little more brothy, but through the cooking process, the broth becomes a little thicker and very rich in flavor. And here's another fun fact for you. Paprika is actually made from dried bell peppers and has been around since the 16th century. If you thought paprika was just for sprinkling on deviled eggs, think again. Beef burritos. Beef burritos were a popular choice for quick dinners during the 1970s, especially as Mexican food started gaining more popularity in the United States. Ground beef seasoned with spices like cumin, chili powder, and garlic is wrapped in a soft flour tortilla, often paired with beans, cheese, and salsa. While burritos are a Mexican invention, the version we know today, filled with a range of ingredients and sometimes deep-fried, evolved as it spread north into the U.S. By the 1970s, burritos had become a quick and affordable way to enjoy flavorful food without having to sit down to a full meal. They were simple to prepare, easy to customize, and perfect for a family dinner on a budget. Whether served in a simple, straightforward style or loaded with toppings, beef burritos were a hit at the dinner table. That's it for today's lunch throwback. If you love these classic recipes, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more trips down memory lane. Until next time, let's keep those old glory days alive.